Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Last Week Tonight, where we delve into the complex world of tariffs. I know what you're thinking. John, tariffs, really? That's about as exciting as watching paint dry? Well, buckle up, because tariffs, my friends, are anything but boring. They're essentially taxes on imported goods. Imagine this, you're buying a fancy new phone, but instead of just paying the shop price, the government slaps on an extra fee because it was made overseas. That, in a nutshell, is a tariff. These pesky little charges can be a fixed amount per item, like $5 for every pair of imported shoes. But more often, they're a percentage of the product's value. So a 10% tariff on a $100 gadget means you're shelling out an extra $10. And guess who usually ends up footing the bill? You guessed it, the consumer. Now, you might be wondering, why bother with tariffs at all? Well, proponents argue they protect domestic industries from foreign competition, boost local manufacturing, and generate revenue for the government. But as we'll see, the reality is often far more complicated, and the potential downsides can be significant. So, how do tariffs actually play out in the real world? Well, let's say we have a tariff on imported steel. Sounds simple enough, right? But here's where it gets interesting. That steel might be used by a domestic manufacturer to build cars. With the tariff, the cost of steel goes up, and suddenly those shiny new cars become more expensive to produce. The manufacturer has two choices: absorb the increased cost and take a hit to their profits, or pass it on to you, the consumer, in the form of higher prices. And it doesn't stop there. Remember those cars we talked about? Well, they might be shipped overseas to be sold in other countries. But with the added cost of tariffs, they become less competitive in the global market. So now not only are domestic consumers paying more, but our exports might also take a hit. But hey, maybe that's a price we're willing to pay to protect our domestic industries, right? Well, not so fast. Because as we'll explore in the next section, the intended benefits of tariffs don't always materialize, and the unintended consequences can be far-reaching. Now let's talk about the elephant, or perhaps the donkey, in the room, former President Donald Trump and his love affair with tariffs. Trump, a self-proclaimed tariff man, saw tariffs as a key weapon in his arsenal to address what he perceived as unfair trade practices and bring back manufacturing jobs to America. His main target? China, of course. The US trade deficit with China, a whopping $295 billion in 2024, became a particular obsession. Trump believed that slapping tariffs on Chinese goods would force them to the negotiating table and reduce this imbalance. He also argued that tariffs would protect American businesses and workers from what he called unfair competition, ultimately revitalizing the US manufacturing sector. It was a bold gamble, but one that came with significant risks, as we'll see in the next section. Section 4, the trade war battlefield, global economic impacts. So how did Trump's tariff gamble play out on the global economic stage? Well, it's safe to say it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. Initially, the stock market didn't take too kindly to the uncertainty and volatility caused by the trade war. The tariffs did lead to some job creation in certain sectors, but they also resulted in job losses in others. Farmers, for instance, were hit hard by retaliatory tariffs from China on agricultural products. And remember those higher prices for consumers we talked about? Yeah, those became a reality too. But the impact went far beyond just the US and China. The trade war created ripple effects throughout the global economy, disrupting supply chains, increasing costs for businesses, and fueling uncertainty in financial markets. The OECD even warned that a 10% increase in global tariffs could reduce global output by 0.3% and raise inflation by 0.4% annually over 3 years. In essence, the trade war created a lose-lose situation for everyone involved, but as if that wasn't enough, it also opened the door to a dangerous cycle of retaliation and escalation. Section 5. Retaliation and escalation, a vicious cycle. One of the biggest dangers of tariffs is that they often trigger a tit-for-tat response from other countries. When one country imposes tariffs, others feel compelled to retaliate with their own tariffs, leading to a vicious cycle of escalation that can quickly spiral out of control. That's exactly what happened during the trade war between the US and China. When the US imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, China responded in kind, targeting key American exports like soybeans and automobiles. This back-and-forth exchange of tariffs only served to escalate tensions and further damage the global economy. The problem with this tit-for-tat approach is that it rarely leads to a positive outcome. Instead, it creates a climate of uncertainty and mistrust, making it difficult for businesses to plan for the future and ultimately harming everyone involved. And as we'll see in the next section, history is full of examples of how tariffs and trade wars can have devastating consequences. Section 6. Tariffs. Through time, a historical perspective. Tariffs are nothing new. They've been a tool of economic policy for centuries, often with mixed results. One of the most infamous examples is the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods in the United States. The goal was to protect American businesses and workers during the Great Depression, but instead, it had the opposite effect. It triggered a wave of retaliatory tariffs from other countries, crippling international trade and deepening the global economic crisis. Now, some might argue that the Smoot-Hawley Act was an extreme example and that modern-day tariffs are different, but the underlying principles remain the same. Tariffs are a blunt instrument that can have unintended consequences, especially when used aggressively or without careful consideration of the potential fallout. Section 7, the tariff fallout. Who bears the brunt? So who ultimately bears the brunt of these tariff wars? Well, it's not just the countries involved in the trade dispute. The fallout can be felt far and wide, impacting businesses, consumers, and the global economy as a whole. Take, for instance, the tariffs imposed on solar panels. While intended to protect American manufacturers, they actually ended up raising prices for consumers and slowing down the growth of the renewable energy sector. Similarly, tariffs on steel and aluminum, while benefiting a small number of domestic producers, ultimately hurt industries that rely on these materials, such as construction and manufacturing. The reality is that tariffs are a complex issue with no easy answers. They can have both positive and negative consequences, and the ultimate impact depends on a variety of factors, including the specific tariffs imposed, the response of other countries, and the overall state of the global economy. But one thing is clear: tariffs are a gamble, and one that often comes with significant risks.